Well, Matthew chapter 20 is really a continuation of what was taking place in Matthew chapter 19. So if you weren't here with us for that study, I encourage you to pick up the CD or get it off of our website, because there's really a flow that goes through this whole section of Matthew. And it's really all about power and position. And it's about a king, a real king, and the character of this king and the character of the people that live in his kingdom. Now, Matthew chapter 19, the main focus of that chapter was on the person that we know of as the rich young ruler. And this guy had it all according to the standards of his day, and he really had it all, I think, according to the standards of our day. He was young, he had wealth, he had power. And we really look to those things as being someone who is doing well. And in that day, they were seen as one who was blessed of God. And he came to Jesus, and he basically wanted a bargain with Jesus, like he was buying a piece of property. And it was like, what'll it take to put me into heaven today? And he said, I've followed all the laws. What more do I need to do? And Jesus looked at him and said, you just lack one little thing. It's no big deal. It's not a deal breaker. Just sell all that you have and follow me. And he went away sad. Why? It says because he had a lot of possessions. And what we found out is that it was his possessions that possessed him rather than the other way around. And what we also saw was that it's really God turning our value system and our expectation completely on its head. Because what we count on here, material wealth, youth, power, even external obedience to a set of rules, means nothing in God's economy. It means nothing in God's kingdom. The only thing that matters is to cling to the only one that's good. And that's Jesus Christ. So, the guy went away sorrowful. Jesus picked up on what was going on and uses it as a way to teach his disciples about the realities of what it's like in God's universe. That basically the people that you think are first and foremost and at the top of the heap are really at the bottom. This really goes against everything that we as humans innately grasp onto. And it's really one of the great paradoxes of the Bible. The first paradox is really that here's God, right? Who's above all, first of all, he's the most powerful. And yet, the one who was first became the servant of all. And it's this kind of selfless love. It just permeates the character of God. And our struggle is that we have this default programming in us. Like your computer when you boot it up. It runs through its boot up sequence and it loads the operating system and all this kind of stuff. And it all just sort of happens. And that's the way we are as humans. We boot up in the morning when the alarm goes off. And we have these traits, these values that have just been, burned in. So they automatically run. And one of those values, one of those default values is if you act good and you've got lots of money and you look good, then you are good. And people ought to recognize that and give you what you want. But God says, no, that's not what my character is really all about. It's not about getting power, it's about giving to others. Now, in chapter 20, he's going to continue this thought, and really, although there's a chapter break here, Jesus' words are just continuing right on as if it's the same talk that he's giving. And he's going to use a parable that he'll say at the beginning of the chapter, and then a real-life example that comes up, coincidentally, to really show us this character that God is. And we see this whole thing kind of bracketed on two sides by two groups of vulnerable people that approach Jesus and his response to him. And the first one is back in chapter 19, verse 13 through 15, where you see little kids come to the Lord. And the disciples say, go away, kid, you bother me. I'm sure that's where W.C. Fields got that line. No, not really. But Jesus says, no. As it says in the King James, suffer the little children. Don't hinder them, because these are the kind of people that make up my kingdom. And then on the other side, at the end of this chapter, we're going to see another group of vulnerable people, a couple of blind guys, including, we won't see his name here, but blind Bartimaeus. And they approach Jesus as completely vulnerable. They are blind. There's no social security system. There's no mental health system. There's no disabled anything. I mean, you were on your own. And so you were completely reliant on the generosity of others. And they are yelling their way to Jesus. And the people don't like that. But it's Jesus' response to these two groups of vulnerable people that kind of bracket this idea of what is this king really like? What are we supposed to be like as members of his kingdom? And it's a stark contrast to what takes place in the middle. With the rich young ruler and his attitude, I'm superior, I can bargain my way into heaven, and then a couple of the disciples that feel like, well, maybe power and position is what I want after all. So kind of think about that, those things in contrast to each other. So let's begin in chapter 20, verse 1. So let's just read through this whole parable, and then we'll come back and talk about it some. For the kingdom of heaven is like a master of a house who went out early in the morning to hire laborers for his vineyard. After agreeing with the laborers for a denarius a day, he sent them into his vineyard. And going out about the third hour, he saw others standing idle in the marketplace and said to them, you go into the vineyard too, and whatever is right I will give you. So they went. Going out again about the 6th hour and the 9th hour, he did the same. And about the 11th hour, he went out and found others standing. And he said to them, why do you stand here idle all day? And they said to him, because no one has hired us. He said to them, you go into the vineyard too. Now, so far they would be saying, okay, day laborers, you know, this is understandable. Don't know what's going on here, but the story sounds plausible so far. So then in verse 8, when evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his foreman, call the laborers and pay them their wages, beginning with the last up to the first. And when those hired about the 11th hour came, each of them received a denarius. Now when those hired first came, they thought they would receive much more, but each of them also received a denarius. And on receiving it, they grumbled at the master of the house, saying, these last worked only 1 hour, and you made them equal to us and have borne the burden, equal to us who have borne the burden of the day and the scorching heat. But he replied to one of them, friend, I am doing you no wrong. Did you not agree with me for a denarius? Take what belongs to you and go. I choose to give this last worker as I give to you. Am I not allowed to do what I choose with what belongs to me? Or do you begrudge my generosity? So the last will be first, and the first last. Okay, so first of all, we shouldn't, remember these stories of Jesus, these parables, are a fictional story that tells an important spiritual point. And we err when we take them and just overlay them exactly and woodenly, literally. We don't earn our way into heaven, okay? And you don't go into God's vineyard and earn your denarius, which is your ticket to heaven. That's not the point of what's going on here. What seems to be the focus of this story is really all about attitudes. It's the attitude of the owner of the vineyard, the Lord, and the men who came early into the employer's vineyard, those that came in at the beginning in the at the beginning of the day, and the reaction to the character of the owner of the vineyard. Now it says that he went out early in the morning. They worked a 12-hour day, so that would have been about 6 o'clock in the morning. They basically worked from sunup to sundown. So it's interesting to me that he goes out and negotiates a wage. It says here that he agreed with the laborers for a denarius. A denarius was typically a day's wage, so you could just translate that to whatever you make in a day. That's what they agreed that they would make. The workers actually had a say in what they were going to agree